Hi, this is Dr. Christopher Maloney, naturopathic doctor in Augusta, Maine, talking about irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome is a garbage can diagnosis made by gastroenterologists who don't find massive organic disease in your bowel. It has relatively no use in terms of clinical treatment. We have a range of a few drugs that are somewhat effective in some cases, but even within the gastroenterologists themselves, they would subgroup, you have your diarrhea-based IBS, you have your constipation-based IBS, and you have your mixed IBS. The principal problem I have with IBS at this point is we're starting to see more and more of well, this is a mental thing. This is something happening in your head. I'm like, no, it's happening in your gut. There's the body-mind connection, it's called the neck. This is something, there are nerve roots and nerve complexes down in the gut. They actually exceed the number elsewhere in our body, and they are very actively involved. If you do have nightmares, you can have an upset stomach, but an upset stomach can cause nightmares. With IBS, we can actually document that these people have a different reaction to distension and bowel movement than a control group of the population. And IBS people typically fall into, for me, different categories. There are people who've had IBS from the time they were born. And there's actually a rare disease called abdominal migraine, where they just were experiencing a migraine-like symptom, but it's in their bowel. There are also people who have shown up with IBS, and there was an exposure at some point. They had parasites, or they had something, they had a hospitalization where they got antibiotic-resistant bacteria in there, and they've had IBS ever since. And my answer is that's not IBS, that's an infectious disorder that's gone chronic. You're not dying of it, but you're constantly experiencing the symptoms of it. And then there's the group that have IBS that shows up and doesn't show up based on stress in their life. But those people can still address the dietary and the bacterial levels in their body and get some benefit from that. But if you're constantly concerned about what's happening in your bowel, at some point you've got to retrain yourself to become less sensitive, and this is possible. You can do mental tricks to make that less of an issue. But if you work through the process of what's going on in my bowel, you monitor what's going on in my bowel, so that typically, if people haven't been told this could be an issue, or that's an issue, or hey, does it occur during your menstrual cycle? Where does it show up? If they get to the point where they have some tools to address IBS and to discuss IBS with themselves and with their families and with their doctor, they become less anxious about it, because nobody wants to go out to a major function and suddenly have to go to the bathroom for 3 hours. It's not unreasonable, and it would be perhaps insane not to have a level of anxiety about that. So the idea is to get a working knowledge of what's going on in your bowel and why it's likely to occur. Start taking some hypotheses yourself. Okay, I think dairy is an issue, or maybe it's not, or I think wheat might be an issue, or maybe it's not. And not necessarily to eliminate everything out of your diet at once, but just to monitor yourself. Hey, this is what happened when I did this. This is what happened when I did that. When you start doing that, you start monitoring what's going on in your body, you become less anxious about it, because you start feeling like, not that you have control per se, but you understand what's going to happen. And that's extremely important with IBS. You really want to understand what's going on in your body, and I'm really going to, again, say it's not happening in your head. Your head will respond to it, but it's not happening in your head, it's actually happening in your gut. And so IBS needs to be dealt with as a range of illnesses, a range of things that are happening, and something that can actually be affected by having the family, the school diarrhea comes home, and suddenly the IBS person's like, oh my God, why is my IBS all gotten worse? I'm like, because there's a diarrhea going around. This has nothing to do with your, the disease IBS. This has to do with, your kids gave you diarrhea, and that's what's been going on for 2 weeks, and you had a really bad case of it because your bowel is already reactive. So, need to look at IBS as a range of illnesses. Need to become very aware of what's going on in your own case and be able to give that information to somebody who actually can differentiate the different types of IBS for you and say, hey, this is the kind you've got. This is what's most likely to be helpful. This is Dr. Christopher Maloney, naturopathic doctor in Augusta, Maine, talking about IBS. Thank you.